Tonight, or I guess more accurately, tomorrow in the very early morning, 1 a.m. Eastern, I'll be going live because that'll be time for day one of the Splatoon 3 Nintendo World Championships that are happening in Japan. To prep for watching and analyzing these matches, I went looking for information on the teams that'll be competing, and found that Nintendo of Japan had at least tried to do some of that work for me. They put out a preview video introducing the teams that had qualified to compete in it. I became interested in hearing what they had to say, and to learn a little more about the non-Western teams that would be competing. Then I saw them introduce Jackpot, highlighting .Q's Ballpoint Splatling, and I became especially intrigued, because it's been multiple patches since Ballpoint has been an influential part of the metagame, and whoever wrote the video is probably going to be very surprised to see what .Q will actually be playing. The thing is, the video is in Japanese, and there's no localized version I can find anywhere promoting the event. That's where Guster Animations comes in, who did the translation I used to make this video. You'll be hearing their voiceover in a few of the clips. I'll be summarizing the parts I want to comment on for the sake of the video, but I'll also upload the full translation by Guster separately, and put a link to that in the description if you want to get the full context. Special thanks to Rassicus for helping to revise that translation, and also for being Rassicus. The video starts with Jackpot, and they highlight a double Splatling team comp that Jackpot almost certainly won't be running at Worlds. Jackpot makes posts on their team Twitter for the tournaments they compete in, so it's pretty easy to track which weapons they've been using lately. According to that record, .Q, who the video dubs the American Inkjetter, hasn't used Ballpoint or any other Inkjet weapon in tournament since November. The footage they use of the Inkjet play comes from the 2023 Nintendo Live tournament that qualified them for the World Championships. That's probably the only footage the writers of Nintendo's video here have found of them, so that's what they knew to write about. To be fair, the video we're looking at is in Japanese and wasn't localized. I know it's a lot harder for me to find footage in languages that I can't type on my own keyboard, and I don't entirely blame them for not knowing to look for, say, the Jackpot Twitter account. The problem is that Nintendo Live tournament happened in early September, and Splatoon 3 is a game that gets patched periodically in ways that change the metagame. .Q has been playing mostly Pencil and Charger lately, with splashes of Rapid Pro here and there, so that's what I'm expecting to see for the most part. I did see her use Ballpoint on a recent streamed team practice, for what that's worth. Maybe as a map mode specific idea, that's the most I would predict. They do point out that when Jackpot push up, they attack from two different directions. And yeah, that's how a coordinated offense works. Probably not a defining trait for a top-level team. They've all had that part of the game figured out years ago. The next team highlighted is Kaiser, the European squad that beat Alliance Rogue and Spark in the EU Championships. If you're a Stamper player and you're not familiar with Xerez, get familiar with Xerez. Anyway, the writer highlights Kaiser's adaptability, their willingness to tweak their team comps in the middle of the match to adjust to their opponent's strategy. Then they put this graphic on screen, which isn't exactly the best evidence to support that observation. Sure, there's one comp that stands out as notably different, but that's the one they played in Turf War, which demands a very different comp just by the nature of the game mode. I'm not saying Kaiser aren't adaptable, just this isn't great evidence of that. This will be a pretty common theme of this video, that what the writer says is often not a bad take, just that the evidence they find to support it often doesn't actually support it. As someone who has also edited videos about Splatoon, I will say I've been guilty of the same in the past, and while I'm going to point it out and poke fun at it anyway, please realize that it's lighthearted and nowhere near my primary criticism of Nintendo and the way they interact with their competitive communities. A more specific example they bring up of how Kaiser is the chameleon core, and yes, that is the word chameleon being used verbatim in English, is that after seeing Volti's Carbon Roller being played, they respond to that sharking playstyle by adding point sensors to their team comp. It was easy to find which match they're referring to here, because, again, it was just from the qualifier that got them here. Again, unless they're hiring someone to write this who's really plugged into both the Eastern and Western scenes and is at least bilingual, I don't blame them too much for over-relying on this footage. But what does strike me as odd is that Kaiser were playing point sensor weapons well before Volti ever actually pulled out the Carbon Roller. The clip they show of Volti on Sturgeon is the first time Volti played Carbon in the set, and it's already Game 4. Technically the 5th game, since Game 1 was really a Turf War best of 3. If it's an adaptation, it's not one that came about as an improvisation in the middle of the set, but from all of those players already knowing Volti's weapon pool, something they could have planned for months in advance of the event. Based on what I've seen, I think Jackpot honestly has a lot more weapon variety than what we've seen from Kaiser here. .Q alone has become one of the best Western players on Splash, Flingza, Ballpoint, and Pencil, all when she'd prefer to be playing a one-shot charger instead. If the team thinks a weapon fits into their comp and someone wants to play it, they trust each other to master that weapon at an elite level in a shockingly short amount of time, and that trust has always been well-founded. That said, a lot of this is pretty common among top players and isn't even really the kind of thing that distinguishes them from one another. They'll play what wins them games, whatever that happens to be. I do have to give credit to the writer for highlighting Majin and creating a storyline out of how he's been to the World Championships before in 2018. They make him out to be hungry to take another shot at being a world champion. But please don't interview the man in the middle of the tournament again.
I'm being completely ignored. Okay.
I think they're trying to focus right now.
Guys, how are we doing? How are you doing? We good?
What did you say?
I said, how are you?
I'm doing great, bro.
This kind of thing is really disruptive to a player's focus during a moment this stressful, especially with everyone getting iced by Alliance Rogue's technical difficulties. Minor blemish on the otherwise well-done commentary and MCing from Nintendo EU's production team. I'd love to hear those casters again, and for the MC, maybe that was something Nintendo told him to do. Maybe, with so much time he didn't expect to have to fill by himself, he just did what he had to do to keep the online audience from clicking off. Just probably best to focus on crowd work instead at a time like that. Moving on to the Greasy Goblins, the Australia-New Zealand representatives, the writer highlights their long-range pressure. The Goblins were running a comp that's surprisingly similar to a meta comp these days, considering that they weren't on the same patch. Latias was on Chargers, Pencil or E-Leader, with Nex one-tricking Shot, Link playing some sort of bucket, and Remy one-tricking Splash. Or is it Remy? I don't think I've ever actually heard it pronounced, but apologies if I'm wrong on that. That means they've got a long-range charger looking at you, with a Crab Tank and a Zuka that can also lock down large sightlines and get long-range picks, even if not all the main weapons have the range to match. Side note, why is the only recording I could find of this on YouTube on an account with 18 subscribers and a channel bio written in Spanish? Nintendo streamed it on their official Twitch channel, and it's got all the production quality and branding. Did they just not realize they needed to highlight it on Twitch to save it? I miss Firetail events. Anyway, I do like their observation about the Goblins team comp, though I'm expecting we'll be seeing a lot of very similar comps played by other teams as well, and that it won't be as distinguishing a feature for the team this time around. As their key player, which if you haven't picked up on by now, they're choosing one of for each team, they highlight Nex. Nex, to be clear, is absolutely cracked at this video game, but I'm not sure that what's impressing the writer would be the same thing that one of Nex's peers would find impressive about Nex. It strikes me as the writing of someone who's played the game and then saw competitive play and was impressed simply because they haven't seen competitive play before.
Nex didn't see the opponent. How the heck did he hit them?
This Zuka shot is nice, but also bear in mind that the Tri-Zuka hitbox is really big. With every shot, you're basically nuking 50% of the space your opponent is capable of occupying back there at a particular point in time. And if you flip enough coins, your chances are pretty good for getting the headshot you're looking for. The next splat on the Wiper, who catches him by surprise, is also credited to him, but his teammates were in such a strong position against the Wiper that they would have gotten the splat on their own even if he'd just run away. And he misses quite a few shots before it happens. Nex probably just wasn't expecting the push to happen because their opponents were already down a player and the Wiper was completely alone diving into 3 of them. Nex may well be their ace player, as the writer dubs them, but I'm sure there are some much more flashy, impressive clips to show that off than what they've found here. Next, we move on to Unidon, the representatives of Korea. The writers put a lot of emphasis on this team's ability to distract opponents, citing the Tentabrella, which makes sense, and the Dapples Nouveau, which might make sense, but they don't do a great job of showing. Their first example involves this Reef Slider play. I wanted to find the original recording because, to me, this looks like feeding. The one opposing player that does go down wasn't actually even splatted by the Reef Slider, so the use of the special appears to be totally unnecessary, and the Dapples end up far from cover and out of range to deal damage against the players looking at them. Against top teams, this distraction will end in the Dapples player getting splatted really quickly if there isn't pressure from the rest of the team to back them up immediately. The regional qualifier that narrowed down to 4 Korean teams is on the Nintendo Korea YouTube channel, but the finals between those 4 teams to decide which team would actually go on to the championships were held in Tokyo. And according to players from Unidon, the matches were never recorded, so a recording of this match is nowhere to be found publicly. That said, SBPC, who speaks Korean and has actually seen the replay code this match comes from, can confirm that in practically the next frame after this freeze frame, the Dapples player just explodes. So, this wasn't exactly the tactical distraction the Nintendo writer characterizes it as. Essentially, the Tentabrella is going to go in and draw aggro, and then the Dapples are going to find a fight they like and try to go in to splat someone, taking advantage of the distraction, and the Stamper and Splash will deal long-ranged chip to help wherever they're needed. It's not that Nintendo really had a bad analysis, just they had trouble finding clips that really highlighted it well. Phantom Thief, the Japanese representatives, actually get interviews in this video, so we learn a little more about them from their own perspectives, but not by that much. Essentially, what the analysis boils down to is that they're coordinated and they're clutch. The video describes how many of their matches were really close, and that their skill was finding a path to victory when they were put on the back foot. The video focuses on bucket player Sanku, showcasing plays where he pushes up aggressively, wins space by splatting someone, and is then able to hold ground against being traded back, securing a lot of space for the team from his individual play. There's not a lot to really unpack here, because there aren't a lot of specific claims being made. I'm definitely less knowledgeable about Japanese top players than I'd like to be, but my understanding is that these aren't the very highest tier of elite-level players in the region, and it wouldn't be surprising to see Jackpot or even Kaiser be able to tackle them. The Melons and Niagoras, the X-Power record holders and solo carries are the best teams on Earth. It seems like some of them decided to sit the world qualifiers out, and that leaves Japan unusually vulnerable in this tournament despite being indisputably the best Splatoon-playing region on the planet by their depth chart. Jackpot is in a uniquely strong position to put NA on the map here, as they've been scrimming a lot with Japanese teams and playing tournaments with them over the past year, so one would imagine there's less that will catch them off guard. There are 6 slots in the finals, but there are 7 teams covered by the video, because one of the slots had yet to be decided as recently as yesterday. On the Nintendo Hong Kong YouTube channel, you can find the match between GDEX and Smart Roast Chickens that determined which of them would be in the finals. Nintendo's video came out before that happened though, so I'll cover both of them and won't spoil who advanced in case you want to check it out yourself beforehand. GDEX represent Hong Kong, and their analysis from Nintendo focuses heavily on Kenji's roller play. Now, this is probably the best choice they've made for a key player so far, in that picking a roller has a drastic impact on the way the rest of the team has to play around you. The roller needs paint to function and wants people distracting the opponents for it, but it can also rack up splats insanely quickly if it gets in just the right position. This is exactly how Alliance Rogue plays around Volti's Carbon Roller, and they've done so to great effect themselves. The triple that Kenji gets off a sharking play in the promo clip is honestly pretty standard for a roller, but it's a great illustration of the playstyle, and I give the writer a lot of credit for understanding what's going on there and communicating it to an audience in a logical way. Smart Roast Chickens from Taiwan have a leader player and a 52-gal one-trick. Player YDD appears to like weapons with one-shots, as we know them to have played Blaster, Range Blaster, Stamper, and Roller. And that's something the analyst highlights about their team comp. They also ran Anarchy Nova against GDEX, but on that kit, the Inkjet, which has a one-shot, is basically the main weapon, so I think it still tracks. They first highlight Smart Roast Chicken's fast offense, their ability to snowball splats that they get into lockouts really quickly. This is a correct analysis, but also something that basically any top-level team should be able to accomplish, unless they're going for a highly defensive zoning playstyle, which is generally pretty unorthodox. Still, the team has a more aggressive frontline than average, and they do move very quickly off these tri-strikes. What's a little bit shakier is the key player segment where they highlight Lin, a 52-gal one-trick. Their first clip is great for showing off the aggressive potential of the 52's splash wall, but in the clip after that, They draw a circle around the splash wall as it goes out, only to go into slow-mo where you can clearly see that this splash wall accomplished nothing in the fight. It never deployed in time to block any damage. Lin won the fight not because of the splash wall, but in spite of the extra time it took to throw when he wasn't returning fire at the opponent. The same thing happens in the next clip, where the writer claims that this splash wall blocks the opponent's attack.
Firstly, he throws out the splash wall and blocks the opponent's attack.
It, doesn't block the opponent's attack. You can see how these ideas could play out, but this may actually be exposing a potential weakness in the team, that they're moving up and taking space so quickly that the 52 doesn't actually have time to get their wall set up the way they want to. Lin's aim is good enough that it carries him through these situations, and maybe these are just cherry-picked examples because they really wanted to show off what the 52 can do when it's set up and never got good footage of that. But whether this would go unpunished in competition with other larger regions remains to be seen. Like I said 4.5 pages of script ago, I'll be live a little before 1 a.m. Eastern with my reactions to Day 1, so come join me there as we watch these storylines, or maybe completely different ones, play out at the World Championships. I've been pretty vocal with my criticism of Nintendo's handling of their competitive titles, but I'm also all about supporting the top players who are flying out to Japan to prove themselves. And I bet we'll all have plenty to learn from watching it. See you later.